You are the best trained soldier on Earth. Your rifle can punch through an engine block. Now imagine firing 6 rounds, center mass, into something that just keeps walking toward you. That is what one Special Forces team says happened inside a cave in Kandahar Province in 2002. One of them did not walk out. The United States government says this never happened. So why was the after-action report for that exact grid coordinate sealed for years? Quick thing before we go further. Tell me where you are watching from, city, country, drop it below. I read every single one. Today's like goal is just 50. Only 50. If we hit it, that tells me to keep digging into stories like this one. New here, and you like unexplained cases that come with real documentation attached? Hit subscribe. Now, back to the cave. It is 2002. Early into Operation Enduring Freedom, American Special Forces are scattered across the Hindu Kush, moving through terrain most modern militaries had never operated in before. Their mission is simple to describe and brutal to execute. Clear the caves, find Al-Qaeda holdouts, find Osama bin Laden. These are not ordinary caves. Some had not felt outside light in centuries. Local villagers in this stretch of Kandahar Province avoided certain valleys long before any soldier arrived. Elders warned children away from specific ridgelines. They still do. Pashtun oral tradition speaks of something ancient living deep in these mountains. Stories older than any war fought here. Historians will also point out something stranger. Over 2,000 years earlier, soldiers marching under Alexander the Great crossed this same general region through what was then called Bactria. Some ancient chroniclers recorded that his men described encounters with enormous mountain-dwelling figures during that campaign. Most historians today treat this as legend, exaggeration, or mistranslation, but the story never fully disappeared from this part of the world. It simply changed languages, passed from empire to empire, army to army, generations to generation, always attached to the same general stretch of high, unmapped terrain. By the time American boots reached these same mountains in 2002, almost nobody carrying a rifle had ever heard that older story. They were focused entirely on the present war, not on 2,000-year-old campaign records, which is exactly why, if any part of Shooter's account is accurate, none of them would have known what they were supposedly looking at. In August or September of 2002, according to an account that surfaced anonymously years later, a Special Forces detachment was ordered to locate a missing patrol near a remote grid coordinate in Kandahar Province. Radio contact with that patrol had gone silent 2 days earlier. No enemy contact had been logged, no explosion, no gunfire reported, just silence. The detachment moved on foot, uphill, through terrain no vehicle could reach. Full gear, thin air, and a supply line already stretched to its limit. This kind of mission was standard for the region that year. Tier 1 teams were routinely tasked with sweeping cave systems that no government had ever mapped. Some of these systems ran for miles underground, connecting valley to valley through rock corridors nobody had documented since long before recorded history in the area began. Standard procedure called for 2-man stacks clearing room by room, flashlights and weapon-mounted lights, doing all the work sunlight never could down there. Radios crackling with static the deeper the teams went. Local guides, when they agreed to work alongside American units at all, would sometimes stop walking at a specific point on a trail and refuse to continue. No real explanation was usually given, beyond a shake of the head and a glance back toward the ridgeline. What the detachment found that day, according to the soldier who eventually told this story, was a massive cave mouth cut into the rock, wide enough for several men to walk through shoulder to shoulder, and bones scattered near the entrance in a way that did not resemble any ordinary battle site. Broken, old enough that nobody in the unit could immediately explain them. Some of the bones, according to the account, were simply too large to belong to anything the squad recognized. But according to his account, that was not the strangest part of what waited for them that day. The man who first told this story online used only a call sign. He goes by Shooter. He says he was point man that day, first man in. First man to see whatever was waiting just outside that cave mouth. His account first appeared years later, shared anonymously on a late-night radio program, built entirely around unexplained phenomena and first-hand caller accounts. According to Shooter, the smell hit them before anything else did. It smelled worse than a skunk, he reportedly said. Like dirt, sweat, and dead bodies, all mixed together. His unit had been in country for months by that point, tired in a way that goes past exhaustion. Alert in a way that only comes from months of expecting an ambush around every rock formation. They were trained to expect men, insurgents with rifles, IEDs buried under loose stone. Not this. Shooter has described, in later retellings, how the light changed as they approached the cave mouth that morning. Overcast. Flat. The kind of gray that swallows shadow instead of casting it. He says that detail has stayed with him longer than almost anything else from that deployment. He also says the missing patrol's gear was found first, scattered near the tree line below the cave, undamaged and mostly untouched. No blood, no shell casings, no sign of a firefight of any kind. Just equipment, set down as if the men carrying it had simply stopped moving. Dan is the one name that survives in every version of this story. Shooter has said, in more than one retelling, that Dan was not new to the unit and not new to this kind of terrain. A veteran of earlier rotations, someone the younger guys on the team looked to without being told to. Shooter describes him as the kind of soldier who checked everyone else's gear before checking his own, out of habit more than orders. None of the men's actual last names, hometowns, or service records have ever been published or confirmed. Shooter has said this is deliberate, out of respect for families who, in his account, were told an entirely different story about how their son or husband died that year. Shooter says the squad fanned out along the cave entrance in standard formation, weapons up, scanning the tree line and the rock face for the missing patrol or any sign of them. That is when, according to his account, something moved at the edge of the cave mouth. Not a man, something taller than any man had a right to be. He later described it as red-headed, somewhere between 13 and 15 feet at full height, wearing what looked like stitched hides rather than any woven fabric. Shooter has added, in later versions of the account, details he says he left out the first time simply because nobody believed the first version either way. He describes the hands as disproportionately large even for its height, with what he counted, in the half-second he had to count anything, as 6 fingers on each one. He describes the eyes as small relative to the size of the skull, deep-set, and reflective in a way that caught the beam of a flashlight the same way an animal's eyes do at night. He says it did not make any sound before it moved. No footstep on the loose rock, no breath, nothing that should have been physically possible for something that size crossing open ground. He says it was already close by the time anyone clearly registered what they were looking at, closer than any threat briefing had ever prepared them for. And according to his account, it was already moving, directly toward one soldier in particular, a man Shooter refers to only by the name Dan. We are going to stop his account right there, because what happens in the next few seconds, according to Shooter, is the exact moment that changed the rest of every surviving man's life. Quick pause before we go back in. What do you think this actually was? A hoax, an undocumented animal, or something we genuinely don't have a name for yet? Drop your theory in the comments. Now, let's see what the record says happened next. It is that same morning, according to Shooter's account. The cave entrance is silent, except for boots shifting on loose rock. The figure does not stop. It does not slow down the way an exhausted man would. It does not hesitate the way even a determined enemy fighter would, facing 5 rifles at once. It carries something long. According to the account, a crude iron-tipped pike, closer to a primitive spear than any modern weapon. Dan raises his weapon. There is no time for a second thought, no time to call for cover. The figure closes the remaining distance in a way that, Shooter says, simply did not match how a person moves. No stagger, no hesitation, no reaction to the beam of a tactical flashlight crossing directly over its face. Shooter says the pike itself looked hand-forged, not machined, with a wooden shaft thicker than any spear handle he had seen in a museum or a textbook. He says it moved the weapon with one arm, the way another man might swing a walking stick. Then, according to the account, it drives the pike through Dan before a single shot from the squad is fired. The squad opens up immediately, full automatic fire, at a range most soldiers are trained to consider a guaranteed kill shot. Shooter says he personally put 6 rounds into its chest at close range. It was like shooting a tree trunk, he reportedly said. It just kept moving. He has since described watching the rounds visibly connect, watching what he describes as a delayed reaction in the muscle beneath the hide, and watching the figure keep closing distance anyway, as if the impact registered somewhere other than as pain. Modern rifle rounds are engineered to end a threat in well under a second. This time, according to witnesses, it took nearly 30 continuous seconds of sustained automatic fire before the figure finally went down. When it did go down, shooter says it did not fall the way a wounded man falls. It folded slowly, first onto one knee and then fully to the ground, still facing them the entire way down. Silence again. According to the account, nobody spoke for several minutes. Nobody radioed anything back to command immediately, because nobody quite knew what to say into a handset that other men would be listening to. Shooter says the squad stood there, weapons still trained on a body that was no longer moving, for what felt like a very long time. Long enough for the adrenaline to fade and the cold to set back in. Long enough for someone to finally check on Dan, though by then there was nothing left to do for him. When command was finally notified, shooter claims something unusual happened almost immediately afterward. A helicopter was inbound, faster than any routine medevac request should have produced one, arriving by his estimate well before standard response time for that region. He says the men who stepped off that helicopter were not medics. They did not ask where the wounded were. They asked where the body was, and they did not mean Dan's. But according to his account, that still was not the strangest part of what happened next. Years after shooter's account first began circulating, a second anonymous voice came forward, using the call sign Mr. K. Mr. K claims he was the pilot who flew the extraction that day in a CH-47 Chinook out of a forward staging area. According to his account, Ground Command ordered a reinforced pallet loaded onto his aircraft, a weight load he estimates at roughly 1,100 pounds, consistent with standard Chinook cargo procedures. He says the pallet was already covered before it ever reached his flight line. Nobody explained why. Nobody was supposed to ask. He has described the loading crew that day as unfamiliar faces, not the usual ground team he worked with on a normal rotation. He says they wore no unit patches he recognized, and that one of them carried a sidearm openly the entire time, which he says was not standard for a routine cargo transfer. From there, Mr. K's account describes a short flight to Bagram Air Base, followed by a transfer onto a C-130 for a longer haul out of the country. He has never confirmed a final destination. He says he was told directly not to ask, and that he signed paperwork before he was ever allowed to take off that day. Online speculation over the years has attached a rumor to this story, suggesting the cargo may have ended up at a facility connected to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. That detail has never been confirmed by any named source, official or otherwise. As of today, it remains entirely unverified. What makes this second account notable, at least to people who have spent years researching this case, is how closely the small operational details line up with real military procedure. The weight class, the aircraft routing through Bagram, the specific chain of command language. Whether that means the underlying story is true or simply well constructed by someone with real military knowledge is exactly what continues to divide people who have looked closely into it. Separately from these two men, at least 3 other members of the original squad are said to have gone quiet almost overnight after returning from that deployment. According to Shooter, the surviving team was individually debriefed, physically separated from one another, and required to sign strict non-disclosure paperwork before being released from that base. He claims they were warned that discussing the cave publicly could end in a court-martial and confinement. No names beyond Dan have ever been independently confirmed by any outside source. Researchers who have tried to track down service records matching the loose details in this story, a Special Forces detachment, a casualty in the Wright Province, in roughly the right window of 2002, say they have found nothing that clearly matches. That could mean the story is fabricated. It could also mean, according to people who believe the account, that the real record was altered exactly the way whistleblowers claim it was, with the missing patrol and Dan folded quietly into a standard casualty report describing an ordinary ambush instead. There is no way, from where any of us are sitting right now, to prove which of those two explanations is correct. Freedom of information requests filed by independent researchers over the years, targeting the general date range and province, have come back either denied on national security grounds or, in a smaller number of cases, with pages so heavily redacted that entire paragraphs are simply gone. That alone proves nothing about giants. It does prove that something in that specific window of records was judged sensitive enough to withhold. A third account, far shorter and much harder to verify, appeared on a military discussion forum several years after Shooter's story first spread. The poster, using a throwaway account that was deleted within a week, claimed to have served in a logistics role at Bagram Air Base that same year and described an unusual cargo restriction placed on one specific hangar for roughly 72 hours in late summer 2002. The post offered no name, no unit, and no way to confirm the claim. It has never resurfaced since, and it is included here only because researchers following this case treat it as a minor, unverified data point rather than evidence. A fourth thread runs through much older material entirely. Regional folklore in this part of the Hindu Kush, collected by ethnographers decades before the war ever reached these valleys, already described a solitary, red-haired mountain figure blamed for missing livestock and, in a handful of older stories, missing shepherds. These accounts predate any American presence in the region by generations, and researchers are careful to note that folklore is not evidence of a physical creature. It is, at minimum, evidence that the shape of this story existed in local memory long before 2002, told around fires in the same valleys, in the same general language, decades before any American unit ever walked those trails carrying a rifle instead of a walking stick. The Department of Defense, when this story eventually went viral years later, issued a short and specific statement to fact-checkers, saying it has no record of any Special Forces member killed by anything matching this description in Kandahar Province. That remains the official position. It has not changed since. But that denial itself became part of the story because, as people following this case often point out, most fabricated internet legends never receive a specific, on-the-record denial from a national defense department. Most simply get ignored entirely. So what could actually explain something like this? 4 theories keep resurfacing whenever this case is discussed. Theory 1. Combat stress and extreme sleep deprivation. Fatigue and high altitude are documented to distort human perception in the field, and military psychologists have studied this exact effect across decades of high-stress deployments. Soldiers operating for months on broken sleep, thin oxygen, and constant low-grade fear are demonstrably more prone to misjudging distance, size, and movement under pressure. It is a real and well-documented phenomenon, and it deserves to be taken seriously before anything else is considered. What it does not explain, according to people who have studied this case closely, is why 2 men who both claim they never spoke again after their separation later described the same 6 fingers, the same red hair, and the same specific smell without ever comparing notes in between. Theory 2. An unknown or poorly documented animal. Remote mountain ranges, disrupted by decades of continuous conflict, can sometimes shelter species poorly studied by modern science, and history has plenty of examples of animals presumed extinct or fictional turning out to be real, just rare. But no known animal on record simply absorbs 6 center-mass rifle rounds at close range and keeps advancing toward the shooters. No known animal fits the specific bone field described at that cave mouth either, and no known primate reaches anywhere near the height described in either man's account. Theory 3. Deliberate deception, using disguise or misdirection as a psychological tactic against an exhausted patrol. Wartime psychological operations involving costume, stage sightings, and manufactured warfare are a documented tactic going back generations of conflict, used by multiple armies long before this war began. But this theory struggles badly to explain a target that reportedly absorbed roughly 30 seconds of sustained automatic fire at close range without ever dropping, staggering, or crying out. Theory 4, and this is the one that true crime and mystery communities keep circling back to more than any other. Regional folklore. Long before any modern army ever set foot in these mountains, local oral tradition already described something enormous living deep in this exact terrain, blamed for disappearances that long predate any war. If that theory carries any weight at all, then whatever these soldiers encountered was never new and never man-made. It was simply already there, waiting in ground nobody had disturbed in generations, undisturbed until a patrol walked in looking for something else entirely. None of these 4 theories fully explains every detail in this account on its own. That gap is exactly why this particular story has never fully gone away. Stay with me, because the final part of this story connects directly back to how we opened this video, and it is the one detail that never got a clean answer. If you've made it this far, go ahead and hit that like button right now. This is where Mr. K's account gets specific in a way it never had before in any earlier telling. He says that just before the pallet was fully sealed for transport, he caught a glimpse of part of what was underneath the covering, a hand. According to his account, 6 fingers, unmistakably, resting against the edge of the tarp. He has described the skin on that hand as thick, almost leathery, with red hair running down to the knuckle, matching Shooter's description of the creature almost exactly, despite the 2 men, by both their accounts, never having spoken to each other before their stories separately became public years apart. He says nobody on that flight deck spoke again for the rest of the trip to Bagram. He says the paperwork he was made to sign that day is the only physical record he has ever been able to point to, and that even that document, by his account, contains no specific description of the cargo at all, just a weight figure, a destination code, and a signature line. That is where his account stops. He has never named the final facility. He has never confirmed what happened to the remains after Bagram, or whether they even left Bagram at all. Mr. K has said in the one recorded interview he gave anonymously that he requested a transfer out of aviation duties not long after that flight. Paperwork shows the transfer. It does not show, and has never shown, a reason. He says he thought about that flight every time he heard a rotor spin up for years afterward, and that he still does. And that boot print in the dust from the very opening of this video, according to Shooter, that print was never his, and never anyone else's in his unit. It was already there, pressed into the ground, when his squad first arrived at that cave mouth, wider than any standard boot in his squad, and considerably deeper. He says nobody photographed it. There was no time, and by the time anyone thought to, the light had changed and the print was gone, smoothed over by wind and loose dust, as if the ground itself had decided to close back over it. Nobody in his account has ever explained who or what left it there. Extreme fatigue and prolonged combat stress can absolutely bend human perception. Every credible psychologist studying deployed soldiers will tell you that plainly. But soldiers are also trained observers, trained for years to tell the difference between a real threat and a shifting shadow, between the wind moving through rock and something moving directly against it. So maybe the real question here is not whether we personally believe 2 anonymous men telling a story on the internet years after the fact, with nothing but a call sign attached to either name. Maybe the real question is why one specific grid coordinate in one specific province in one specific year still cannot be discussed on the record by the very people who were reportedly standing there. Maybe it is why a government that denies almost nothing about its own failures in that war chose to specifically and publicly deny this one detail, instead of simply staying silent the way it has about so many other unverified stories from the same conflict. Silence would have cost them nothing. A denial cost them a headline. The men who were in that cave, according to every version of this story, never spoke of it in daylight. Only once quietly, in the dark, and never again after that. Which theory do you personally believe? Psychological, an unknown animal, deliberate deception, or something far older than the war itself? Tell me below. I read every single comment. We asked for just 50 likes today. If we pass that number, that is exactly what keeps stories like this one getting made. If we haven't crossed it yet, this is your moment to push us over. Next time, a different war on a different continent, involving a sealed position that stayed off every public map for almost 60 years before anyone in uniform finally admitted it existed at all. Subscribe so you don't miss it when it drops. I'll see you in the dark.